I stood quietly in the shadowed corner of the ballroom, my gaze fixed on a couple swaying in harmony on the dance floor. Their eyes locked with an intensity that seemed to block out the rest of the room. As her partner pulled her closer, the woman's chest rose and fell in sync with her shallow breaths. Her petite figure was enveloped by his much larger frame, moving with a grace that turned every head in the room. He danced with the confidence of an athlete, and she mirrored his steps almost flawlessly. It was impossible to ignore the connection between them, a bond that, while not quite love, was undeniably deeper than friendship. Her honey blonde hair flowed softly over her shoulders as she leaned into him. Yet, it was clear her closeness was less her choice and more the result of his firm, commanding hold. Perhaps I could have envied the chemistry they shared if the woman hadn't been Kelsey, my wife of 11 years, now wrapped in the embrace of her boss, Jason. Instead, anger and humiliation churned inside me. This wasn't the first of her company's annual awards banquets that we had attended, and every guest there was well aware of our marriage. I noticed glances being cast in my direction, some curious, others expectant, as though they were anticipating an inevitable confrontation. After 3 dances, the two of them finally left the floor and joined a group of colleagues at a central table. From where I stood, I could see the way Kelsey gazed at him, a look I recognized all too well. It was the same adoration she used to reserve for me, though it had been years since I'd been on the receiving end of it. My stomach churned with disgust, each glance feeding the simmering rage within me. I felt the pressure mounting, the moment of eruption drawing nearer, but I gritted my teeth and held myself back. Somehow, I needed to endure this just a little longer. My emotions were a tangled mess of resentment, fear, and bitterness as I watched the scene unfold. The love, respect, and trust one once felt for Kelsey were now drowned by a wave of despair and self-pity. I tried to push those feelings aside, but it was a losing battle. For months, I had poured every ounce of effort into repairing our fractured marriage. I planned elaborate date nights, took on extra chores at home, and turned off the television to focus on meaningful conversations. Each attempt was met with indifference. She would walk away mid-conversation or respond to my heartfelt gestures with cold silence. The flowers I left for her, at home, at her workplace, were either ignored or discarded without a second glance. What else was left for me to do but wait? Wait for what, though? That was the question I couldn't answer. Shaking off my spiraling thoughts, I made my way to the makeshift bar tucked into the corner of the room. There, I found myself standing behind Marianne, a former co-worker of Kelsey's. "Enjoying yourself?" I asked casually, masking the turmoil inside me. "Oh, absolutely," she replied with a tipsy grin. "These events are always a treat. And Harold loves the free drinks, of course." I smiled politely and raised my empty glass. "Same here. By the way, I haven't seen Jason's wife around tonight. Any idea where she is? She's always so elegant and a pleasure to talk to." "Didn't you hear?" Marianne blurted out, her lack of tact amplified by the alcohol. "Apparently, he served her divorce papers today. Guess she wasn't holding up her end of the marriage." Her bluntness startled me, but I managed to keep my composure. "No, I hadn't heard that." I lied smoothly. "We've been here since this afternoon, so I guess I missed the office gossip." Grabbing a fresh glass of white wine for Kelsey, I walked over to where she stood with Jason. They were so engrossed in their conversation that neither noticed my approach. "Here, I brought you some wine," I said, extending the glass to her. Kelsey jumped at the sound of my voice, startled. "Oh, you scared me," she said with a forced smile, taking the glass. "Thanks, dear." Around us, the atmosphere grew heavier, the tension almost palpable. Most people avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by the tablecloth or something across the room. A younger man, probably in his mid-20s, smirked as he caught me glancing at the table. Our eyes met for a brief moment before his grin vanished, and he, too, pretended to be absorbed by the intricate stitching of the linen. As the clock approached 1 a.m., the crowd began to thin. Guests trickled out of the hotel hall, heading home while I remained rooted in place, bracing for whatever came next. It was clear that Rebecca wasn't ready to leave her dance partner's side just yet. I decided to interrupt, carefully masking my frustration. We should probably head home, sweetheart. I still need to drop off the babysitter, and we promised we'd have her home before 2, I said, hoping to bring the evening to a close. Sure, okay. I think it's time for us to go, she replied with a smile. Turning back to Andrew, she added, see you on Monday. Relief swept through the room, dissipating some of the tension as the awkward exchange reached its conclusion. It was good seeing you, Andrew, I said, extending my hand. He gripped it firmly, as if trying to assert dominance. Standing 3 inches taller than my 6 feet, he outweighed me slightly, though I noted the faint softness of his midsection. Meeting his gaze, I caught a glimmer of arrogance and deceit in his eyes. After a moment, he released my hand and bade us good night. We waved to the remaining guests as we exited the ballroom and headed to the car. Silence hung heavily between us on the drive home, though Rebecca wore a serene smile. Once home, she went to check on Emma, our 9-year-old daughter, while I paid Lily, the babysitter, and prepared to drive her home. Returning, I found Rebecca already asleep in bed. After checking on Emma myself, I retired to the spare room, knowing that intimacy was out of the question. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I struggled to remember the last time we had shared a moment of closeness. Saturday morning came early, and I mentally ran through my to-do list. Emma was already in the living room, absorbed in her cartoons. I waved from the doorway. Had breakfast yet? I asked. Yep, she replied, waving her spoon, sending droplets of milk splattering onto the carpet. All right, settle down. Mom's still asleep, and I need to get some work done in the office, I reminded her. Got it, Dad, she shouted, far louder than necessary, making me chuckle. At 8:30, I called Richard, my lawyer, knowing he often worked from home on Saturdays. Good morning, Richard. It's Matthew Franks, I said. Morning, Matthew. Let me guess. This isn't a social call, he replied, already attuned to the gravity of the situation. You guessed right. It's time to move forward. I've heard Andrew served his wife with divorce papers yesterday. Do you know if Rebecca has consulted a lawyer? I haven't heard anything, but I can check. Let's meet at the coffee shop in half an hour. In the meantime, make sure all documents are signed and notarized by Monday morning so we can serve her at lunch, Richard instructed. Sounds like a plan. See you shortly, I confirmed, hanging up. At the coffee shop, I ordered a drink and settled by the fireplace, lost in thought. I never imagined I'd be taking steps to divorce the woman I once considered the love of my life. Reflecting on the events that brought me here, I recalled a seemingly innocuous traffic ticket, a moment that, in hindsight, marked the unraveling of my marriage. The ticket, captured by an automatic camera, had been issued for running a red light. When I opened the envelope, I recognized Rebecca's car and smiled at the thought of her rushing, headlights blazing. But the accompanying photo gave me pause. Beside her in the passenger seat was a man's shoulder and arm. Though his face was obscured, I knew it was Andrew. The date, March 5th, stuck in my mind. I remember Rebecca texting me about plans to stop by Mary's after work to pick up clothes for Emma. At the time, I dismissed it as routine. However, checking the location on Google Maps revealed that the intersection where the ticket was issued was miles away from Mary's home. Still, I convinced myself it could be innocent. Yet doubts crept in. Since late November, Rebecca had been increasingly distant. By January, affection between us had all but vanished, replaced by perfunctory conversations about work and Emma. The dreams we once shared, family vacations, our future, were now absent from our lives. Financially, we were secure. My trust fund, established generations ago, had grown through investments and inheritances. Though Rebecca and I worked steadily to build our savings, I had protected the trust with a prenuptial agreement. Over the years, we updated it, ensuring provisions for Emma's education and other contingencies. Yet none of that could shield me from the emotional devastation I now faced. Seeking clarity, I contacted Richard, who suggested hiring a private investigator. Unfortunately, my usual team is fully booked, but I know someone else, a bit of a wild card. We call him Ethan the Maverick. He's efficient but not entirely conventional, Richard explained. Why the nickname? I asked, intrigued. He's a former cop with a questionable past. While his methods can be creative, his results are thorough. He's known for gathering evidence that's hard to dispute in court. Let's give him a shot, as long as he stays within legal boundaries, I said, resolving to proceed. Over the following days, I continued to shower Rebecca with affection, desperate to repair the cracks in our marriage. Yet her coldness left no doubt. We were nearing an irreversible breaking point. One Thursday afternoon, I was called to Richard's office to review the findings gathered by Ethan the Maverick, the rogue investigator. He presented me with hours of footage that exposed Rebecca and Andrew Carter's clandestine relationship, scenes of their intimacy, shared laughter, and a semblance of joy as a couple. Alongside the videos were damning photographs, detailed call logs, and even copies of personal messages. The evidence was overwhelming, and while I was impressed by Ethan's thoroughness, I also found his invasive methods deeply unsettling. It was clear why he had earned his dubious nickname. As I sat there, I felt my world collapse. The notion of Rebecca having an affair with Andrew Carter was unthinkable to me. I could understand Andrew's appeal. Tall, athletic, and charismatic, with a promising career as the head of her department. He had seamlessly integrated himself into her life over the past year as her boss, creating opportunities to grow close. A former college baseball star, his career in athletics had been derailed by a shoulder injury, but his rise in the corporate world had been equally impressive. Still, I never imagined Rebecca would let him wedge himself between us. The weight of betrayal crushed me, making it hard to breathe. My chest felt tight, my vision blurred, and I fought to stay conscious. I pushed my chair back and leaned forward, inhaling deeply in an attempt to steady myself. The loss was indescribable. I had lost my confidant, my partner, my lover, and the mother of my child. In that moment, I couldn't see a path forward. And then it got worse. Richard played back a recording captured just the day before. As the audio played, the room seemed to close in around me. Really? Do you love me? Rebecca's voice was filled with anticipation and hope. Yes, my dear. You're perfect. I love you and want us to be a family, Andrew replied without hesitation. You mean you, me, and Emma? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Exactly. What about Matthew and Samantha? He countered, as though they were merely obstacles to be removed. We'll divorce them. You'll have Emma, and we'll finally be happy together. The silence that followed was deafening. I imagined Rebecca processing the implications of his words, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. You really love me, Rebecca? Yes, absolutely. I hadn't truly considered leaving Matthew. Her uncertainty was palpable. Consider it for a moment, he urged, his voice growing more persuasive. He can't give you what I can. With me, you'll be the belle of every ball. You'll live a life of luxury and status he could only dream of. His tone dripped with condescension, and I pictured his smug expression as he said it. Then came the words that pierced me the most. Losing Emma would destroy him. But don't worry. I'll be a far better father than he ever could. In a year, she won't even want to visit him. A flicker of concern entered Rebecca's voice. Why do you despise him so much? What has he done to you? Nothing, my love, Andrew replied, his tone dismissive. He's just not worthy of you. He's weak, content to be a cog in someone else's machine. Did you know he's only a plant manager? His facility might boast the highest production and revenue per square foot, but that's hardly ambitious. I felt a strange pang of pride that Rebecca defended me. You don't know him like I do, Andrew. He's stronger and more capable than you realize. He's faced challenges you can't imagine and chose a better path. Promise me you won't resort to violence. I don't want either of you hurt, for Emma's sake and for mine. Her next words shattered me. But I'm not in love with him anymore. You've replaced him, Andrew. You're my man now. As the recording continued, Rebecca asked about logistics. Andrew assured her that divorcing Samantha would be easy, given her fragile mental state and their lack of intimacy. He promised to split their assets fairly and insisted she wait to consult a lawyer until he had served Samantha first. By this point, I couldn't listen any longer. Turn it off, I said quietly, waving a hand to signal I'd heard enough. Richard met my gaze, his expression a mix of empathy and concern. You need to act first, Matthew. Strike before they do. But what if she changes her mind? I asked, clinging to a shred of hope. They rarely do at this stage, Richard said solemnly. I'm afraid they've already crossed a point of no return. Nothing you do or say is likely to change that now. The weight of his words pressed down on me like a final nail in the coffin of my marriage. For the first time, I observed Ethan, the rogue investigator, closely. He appeared to be in his 30s, physically fit, and dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, far from the rough and scrupulous image I had envisioned. His demeanor was unexpectedly respectful, and his insights carried a weight of sincerity that made me reconsider my earlier judgment of him. He seemed to genuinely care about his work, even though it was transactional. He began to feel less like a rogue and more like Ethan, a man who took pride in delivering results. Would you still want her, knowing all of this? Ethan asked, his voice calm but piercing. His question echoed Richard's earlier sentiments, forcing me to confront a harsh truth. You're probably right, Ethan, I admitted with a reluctant nod. Turning to Richard, I added, give me a day or two to think this through, and I'll let you know my decision. Sounds good, Matthew, Richard replied. In the meantime, should we draft the documents now and finalize the details later, or halt the process altogether if you choose not to proceed? Yes, let's move forward with that plan, I agreed. As we wrapped up, Ethan handed me his business card. Here's my personal number, Mr. Franks, in case you ever need me. Please call me Matthew, I insisted, shaking his hand. Thank you, Matthew. If you ever decide to pursue, let's call it alternative solutions. I know people who can assist, Ethan added with a sly grin. They don't call me Ethan the Maverick for nothing. Though unsure of my feelings toward his offer, I nodded appreciatively. It was nice meeting you, Ethan. I'll reach out if needed, though I doubt I could ever take that path against Rebecca. Still, it's good to know I have options. With a parting smile, Ethan bid farewell and drove off. For the rest of the weekend, I wrestled with my emotions, consumed by doubt, anger, fear, and the suffocating weight of disappointment. I couldn't shake the image of Andrew Carter trying to insert himself into my life. Imagining him raising Emma and stealing the role I had fought so hard to fulfill. Rebecca seemed oblivious to the gravity of what was happening, as though she had already decided our family's fate without me. By Sunday morning, a sense of clarity began to emerge through the fog of my emotions. As I sat on the back porch, nursing a headache, I realized that the outcome was inevitable, regardless of my resistance. I had already lost my wife and the life we'd built together. Now, the only question that remained was how this chapter would end, and on whose terms. The saying lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way came to mind, and I resolved that I would not step aside or be dragged along. I would lead. On Monday morning, I picked up the phone and called Richard. Good morning, Richard. It's Matthew Franks. Good morning, Matthew. Have you made a decision? Yes, I said firmly. I want you to complete the necessary paperwork, including only the legal photos Ethan provided. Split everything evenly. I hesitated briefly before adding, do you think we should sell the house? Yes, Richard confirmed. Since the house was purchased using a low-interest loan from your trust, any sale proceeds will primarily go back into the trust. It ensures a clean division of assets. Good. Allocate $200,000 from my trust to Rebecca as a parting gesture. It might soften her stance, knowing she won't be left destitute, I instructed. Also, I want to seek primary custody of Emma. If that's a challenge, let's draft the most generous shared custody arrangement possible. But I'd like Ethan to dig deeper into Andrew's past. Perhaps there's something there, a scandal, fraternity exploits, anything that casts doubt on his fitness as a father figure. I'll have Ethan investigate, Richard assured me. What else? I want to file a lawsuit against Andrew for alienation of affection, I said, the words feeling heavy but necessary. Let's involve Samantha as well. She deserves to know the full extent of her husband's actions. Draft another infidelity divorce plan for her, and I'll cover the costs. If we time it right, we can serve them both simultaneously. That's a bold move, Richard commented, jotting down my instructions. One more thing, I added. I want to sue Rebecca's employer for fostering an environment that allowed her affair with her boss. It may not amount to much legally, but it sends a message. I see what you're aiming for, Richard said, his tone contemplative. It's about creating leverage. Exactly, I replied. Let's make sure this isn't just about losing. It's about standing my ground. While there might not be an explicit moral clause in their company policies, it's questionable for any organization to turn a blind eye to such blatant misconduct, especially when it involves a superior and their direct subordinate. Andrew's position as Rebecca's boss added an undeniable layer of impropriety. Even if this claim doesn't result in significant legal consequences, it's worth rattling the cage to see what comes of it. I get it, Matthew, but keep in mind that this could rack up substantial costs up front and escalate further. We're talking about significant manpower here, especially if you want to take on Rebecca's employer, Richard cautioned. If it escalates, I want to make sure they don't walk away unscathed, or worse, profit unjustly, I said. As my dad used to say, hiring a lawyer is just negotiating the price. Richard chuckled at my dry remark. Your dad sounds like he was a wise man. He was, I said with a faint smile. And I understand I'm not obligated to give her anything from my trust. The prenuptial agreement is rock solid. You're right about that, Richard replied. But after reflecting on it over the weekend, I've decided I don't want to leave her in financial ruin. It's not who I am. If I give her a leg up, maybe she'll be more inclined to accept my terms. Besides, she deserves it. She worked hard for our family, and for years, we were both saving for the same future. I paused, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. This way, she won't have to lean on Andrew as much once she's on her own. She deserves better than him. My voice hardened. But let's be clear. I'm not giving that arrogant scoundrel anything more than he's already taken. My wife should have been enough for him. Anger surged through me as I spoke, thinking of how Andrew had stolen the life I had fought to build. Despite the betrayal, I wanted to remain fair to Rebecca, even if she hadn't reciprocated. Deep down, I knew that someday Emma would understand my actions and see how our family unraveled. Before I forget, Richard, hold off on filing anything for now. I want everything ready to go, but I prefer to wait until Rebecca makes the first move. That'll give me more time with Emma and in our family home. I know I'll need to act eventually, but I want to delay until the very last moment. Understood. We'll keep everything signed, notarized, and on standby. Just give me the green light, and we'll move as planned. We can't file until Monday anyway, but I'll have someone ready to serve them the moment the doors open. Good? That's the plan, I said, ending the call. Later that afternoon, I pulled Ethan's business card from my pocket and dialed his number. Ethan, it's Matthew Franks. How's it going? I'm good, he replied. Are you ready to get your hands dirty? Not quite, I said. I need you to hold off until I give you the go-ahead. No problem, Matthew. What's the game plan? Should we meet? Yes, meet me in an hour, I replied. By the time he arrived, I was already waiting in a cafe parking lot. After grabbing some coffee and snacks, we sat across from each other. I want everything gathered, photos, videos, recordings, everything. And we need to find a way to anonymously send it all to Samantha Carter. Maybe email? I suggested. No problem. I know someone who operates on the dark web. Ethan replied, his tone serious. And if you're open to it, we could post the videos online or send some choice messages to Rebecca's parents or coworkers. Get creative. I shook my head firmly. No, Rebecca has to stay in town for Emma's sake. I don't want her so humiliated that she decides to pack up and leave. Besides, I hesitated. Despite everything, I still love her, even if she doesn't love me anymore. Sliding an envelope containing $5,000 across the table, I said, this should help you get started, but let me know if you need more. Ethan pocketed the money without hesitation. Honestly, $3,000 should be enough. Consider the rest in advance. Fair enough, I said. But stay on standby until I give you the signal. I want to catch them off guard. Also, dig into Samantha's medical history. It might prove relevant down the line. You've got it, Ethan replied. Oh, and Richard mentioned you wanted to look into Andrew's college years. Fraternity days, right? Hoping to find something we can use? Exactly, I said, nodding. Anything that could tip custody in my favor if it comes to that. As we finished our coffee, Ethan shared stories from his law enforcement days, regaling me with tales of shady characters and clever investigations. Despite his reputation, I found myself appreciating his resourcefulness. After shaking hands, we parted ways, each preparing for the next move. That meeting had been 3 months ago, but my thoughts snapped back to the present as Richard arrived, followed closely by his assistant and Ethan. Their expressions were serious, signaling that everything was about to unfold as planned. "Ready to proceed?" Richard asked once everyone was seated. "Yes, it seems so," I replied. "Ethan, do we have any indication if Rebecca has sought legal counsel yet?" Richard inquired. "As far as I can tell, no," I said. "I checked her email briefly after your call and didn't find anything that suggests she's contacted a lawyer. I'll do a deeper dive today and confirm by Monday morning." Ethan grinned and gave me a knowing wink, confident in his ability to uncover anything missed. "And what about Andrew Carter?" I asked, a flicker of hope in my voice. "Any skeletons in his closet?" "Well," Ethan began, during his time in the fraternity, he was investigated for some serious allegations: date abduction, drugs, and underage girls at parties. Nothing led to a conviction, but the evidence was strong enough to raise eyebrows. I've secured copies of the relevant records and handed them over to Richard. Richard nodded, flipping through a file. "I have them here. If needed, this could be powerful in the custody hearing." After reviewing the paperwork we'd meticulously prepared over the last few months, Richard pointed out where I needed to sign. Once the documents were signed and notarized, I turned to address the group. "Ethan, can you find out who Samantha Carter has hired as her lawyer and share the information with Richard?" I asked. "And if her lawyer isn't up to the task?" Richard queried. "Then we'll figure out a way to connect with Samantha directly, but I'd prefer we handle this through proper channels," I replied. "Got it," Richard said. "Do you want to pick up the documents Monday afternoon to hand them to Rebecca yourself?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I want to inform her personally before anything becomes official. After that, you can serve her on Tuesday." Richard nodded in agreement, coordinating with his assistant to schedule a process server for Tuesday morning. We should also start reaching out to Samantha, as she'll likely learn about this soon. I'll ensure her lawyer has our file on Monday afternoon, provided it doesn't interfere with your meeting with Rebecca. Leaning back in my chair, I exhaled deeply. This should all be in motion by Wednesday. "Have you considered where Rebecca will stay Monday night?" Richard asked unexpectedly. "Would it be an issue if she stayed at the house for a few days?" "No, unless she obtains a restraining order. And even then, we're not sharing a bed," I replied. "Legally, it shouldn't pose a problem, but would that create any vulnerabilities?" "A less scrupulous lawyer might try to spin it negatively," Richard cautioned. "It's worth considering." "Fine," I said. "I'll give her a week to arrange alternate accommodations. Our documents already grant me temporary control of the house and custody of Emma, correct?" "Yes," Richard confirmed. "Unless her attorney files a motion to overturn it or we reach an agreement, you retain control. But I still wouldn't recommend sharing a bed, even temporarily. It could give off an odd impression." "No worries there," I replied with a humorless smile. "We haven't shared a bed in months." Turning to Ethan, I asked, "What did you find out about Samantha's health?" "She's been battling depression and bipolar disorder for years," Ethan explained. "Her medications have reportedly impacted her libido, which likely sent Andrew looking elsewhere." "I'm not sure I want to know how you obtained this information," I said with a wry smile. Ethan simply grinned and shrugged, while Richard pretended to be scandalized. "Does this have any relevance to our case?" I asked. "Not immediately," Richard admitted, "but it might become important when addressing custody or living arrangements." We spent the next few minutes refining our strategy before dispersing to handle our respective tasks. As the weekend progressed, a sense of unease lingered. The weight of the impending confrontation with Rebecca was suffocating, and the thought of uprooting Emma's life gnawed at me. On Sunday, I arranged for my aunt to pick up Emma from school on Monday and keep her overnight. She lived on a farm outside the city, where Emma enjoyed playing with the dogs and helping care for the animals. It would give me the time and privacy I needed to address these matters with Rebecca. The hours dragged on as I mentally rehearsed how I would break the news. By Monday morning, there would be no turning back. She would be taking Emma to school on Tuesday, and I had decided that we would break the news to Emma that evening. When I informed Emma of the arrangements, she seemed excited but slightly puzzled about why she had to wait until Tuesday. I explained gently, "Mom and Dad just need some time to discuss a few things, sweetheart." She reluctantly accepted my explanation, though her curiosity lingered. That night, I slept in the spare room again. As I headed there before bed, Rebecca visibly sighed with relief, saying nothing. Lying awake, I ran through my checklist and rehearsed the plan in my head, the weight of the situation keeping me awake far longer than usual. Eventually, sleep claimed me. On Monday morning, I contacted my VP of operations and requested a week off. I also reached out to my assistant and senior production manager, ensuring they had the details they'd need while I was away. By 1 p.m., I arrived at Richard's office to finalize the next steps. To my surprise, Ethan was already there. The office hummed with activity, the desk stacked with papers and files. "Matthew, we filed the paperwork at the courthouse this morning," Richard announced as I sat down. "Here are Rebecca's documents, as you requested. We've arranged for the official filing at your home tomorrow at 9 a.m. Is that timeline suitable?" "Yes, that works," I replied, taking the envelopes. "I'll try to persuade her to take the rest of the week off. I'll let you know if that changes." "Good. That's settled," Richard said, pausing momentarily to gather his thoughts. "Oh, and Ethan found Samantha Carter's lawyer. He's quite competent, so I forwarded him our files. He seemed eager to proceed and might countersue for infidelity, aiming for more than a 50-50 split of their assets. He assured me, though, that he wouldn't take action until tomorrow morning. So far, everything seems to be on track." "Okay, gentlemen, are we forgetting anything?" I asked, scanning the room. "Well," Richard began, "Rebecca appears to have an appointment with her lawyer next week based on her recent calls and emails. It's nothing urgent yet, but keep that in mind." "And Ethan?" I prompted. "All quiet for now. Let me know if you need further assistance," Ethan replied, earning a sharp glance from Richard, who clearly preferred the investigator keep his commentary brief. "Great. Sounds good," I said, though the weight of the moment loomed over me. I left Richard's office feeling as though everything was now in Rebecca and Andrew's hands. Before heading home, I sent a text to Rebecca. "Rebecca, will you be home by 5:30 tonight?" Her reply was quick. "Why? What's going on?" "Nothing serious," I responded. "I was preoccupied over the weekend and wanted to catch up. I arranged for Aunt Alex to pick up Emma and keep her overnight. I thought I'd bring dinner home. Any requests?" "How thoughtful," she wrote back. "Don't worry about dinner. I'll have it ready by 5:30. Her casual tone almost made me feel guilty for what I was about to do. Almost. By 5:15, Rebecca arrived home, changed into something comfortable, and joined me at the table. I had set it and poured us each a glass of wine. She took a long sip, oblivious to what lay ahead. Dinner began with light conversation, and she seemed entirely unaware of what was about to unfold. "What's your schedule like for the rest of the week?" I asked casually after we finished eating, both of us absent-mindedly picking at the remaining food. "Do you want to make plans?" she asked, glancing at me curiously. "No. Irraplia flatly. I thought you might want to take the week off after we talk." Her brows furrowed. "Why would I do that?" "You'll understand," I said, sliding an envelope across the table toward her. She stared at it, then at me, her wine glass poised mid-sip. "I'm aware of Andrew and your intentions to file for divorce," I stated bluntly. Her eyes widened in shock. She coughed, setting her glass down as she processed what I had just said. Her expression shifted as she realized I wasn't bluffing. "What, how?" she stammered, referring to her meeting with the lawyer and Andrew's actions. "I know you're in love with him. I know you plan to take Emma and leave me," I said, my voice calm but firm. I pulled out photos from the envelope and placed them in front of her. Her hands trembled as she picked up the images. Her eyes glistened, and she hiccuped slightly, a telltale sign of her distress. "I'm so sorry, Matthew," she murmured, staring down at the table. "I never wanted this to happen. I don't know what else to say. I understand, Rebecca. I've known for months. I've had time to come to terms with it. Or at least tried to," I replied solemnly. "It's incredibly painful, but the only thing I need to know is if there's something I did or didn't do that drove you toward Andrew." She shook her head, meeting my eyes briefly before looking away. No. God, no. You were a wonderful husband and father. It just happened. I fell for him, she confessed, her voice breaking. Disappointment and relief battled within me. If she had fallen out of love, there was nothing I could have done to stop it. The only thing left now was the paperwork. I handed her the divorce terms. Here's the proposed agreement. It's fair, given the circumstances. The prenuptial agreement stands. My trust is off the table. Joint assets, including the house, will be sold and divided equally. I've requested full custody of Emma, with generous visitation for you. I'll keep her on my insurance, but you'll need to arrange your own. I'm also offering $200,000 from my trust to help you get settled. She nodded slowly, skimming through the documents. I think I should have custody of Emma, she said softly. I understand why you'd want that, I replied. But I don't trust Andrew around her. He might try to win her over with charm and gifts, but I won't let him have her. Let the lawyers handle this. We need to keep it civil, for Emma's sake. Okay, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. I loved you, Rebecca, and I still do, I said quietly. But your actions have shattered me. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I explained to Rebecca that I would remain available until the end of the week, and that, per legal protocol, she needed to be formally served at 9 a.m. the following morning. I didn't want to put you in an awkward position at work, so you may want to consider taking a few days off, I suggested. I know it will be challenging for both of us to share the same space, but I thought we could sit down with Emma tomorrow evening, or perhaps keep her home on Wednesday, to explain the situation. What are your thoughts? Rebecca seemed to pale at the suggestion, her appetite visibly gone. The gravity of her actions appeared to finally sink in. She had no one to blame but herself for this mess. I was content and oblivious before she upended our lives. Her bewildered expression softened into reluctant acceptance. Matthew, you clearly had a plan and outmaneuvered us. I'm not sure how, but you did, she admitted. I'll notify work first thing and stay home until Wednesday at least. Do you think Aunt Alex can keep Emma another night? Maybe we'll keep her home from school tomorrow and bring her back Wednesday morning so we can talk. That sounds like a good idea, I replied. Rebecca gave a subtle nod when I mentioned Ethan, though she said nothing further as she gathered some papers. I bid her good night and left her to process the situation alone. Watching her retreat to the master bedroom and lock the door didn't bother me. Most of my belongings were already in the spare room. I called Aunt Alex to explain the situation. She agreed to keep Emma for an extra night and drop her off Wednesday morning. I informed Emma as well, and while she was puzzled, she accepted the plan. Assuring her that her mom and I would explain everything soon seemed to placate her. As I tidied up, I could hear Rebecca murmuring in her phone behind the locked door. The soft sound of her sobs followed as she mourned the consequences of her choices. Early the next morning, I heard her preparing for work. At precisely 9 a.m., she accepted the legal documents from the process server, leaving shortly afterward without saying much. I assumed she was headed to meet Andrew, her lawyer, or someone sympathetic to her plight. Later that day, Richard called with an update. Both Andrew and their employer had been served. Surprisingly, Samantha Carter had also countersued Andrew for infidelity, escalating the situation. Stay vigilant, Richard warned. Andrew has reportedly made threats against you. He's volatile, and we can't predict his next move. Though I doubted Andrew would act recklessly given what he stood to lose, I took precautions. Retrieving my .45 ACP from the safe, I ensured it was loaded, cocked, and locked before placing it within easy reach. That evening, a black BMW pulled into my driveway. I spotted Andrew, visibly enraged, as he retrieved a baseball bat from the trunk. Alarmed, I hurried to my chair to grab my phone and called 911, reporting, "My wife's boyfriend is in my driveway with a bat." Locking the door, I felt a surge of adrenaline as another car pulled up. Rebecca's voice rang out, frantic and pleading with Andrew to stop. A screech of tires followed. Suddenly, the front door shattered. Andrew burst inside, screaming threats. "I took your wife, and now I'll take your daughter too," he bellowed, raising the bat over his head. I allowed him to advance closer, too close before drawing my weapon. His wild swing was no match for the distance, and the sound of the first shot echoed through the house. 2 more shots followed in rapid succession. Andrew stumbled, then collapsed. I barely registered Rebecca's scream as officers arrived, disarmed me, and secured the scene. Andrew was pronounced dead on the spot. Over the following days, police reports revealed that Andrew had received his termination notice, my lawsuit, and divorce papers from Samantha simultaneously. His rage boiled over, and he sought revenge, targeting me. Rebecca's attempt to intercept him left her with a black eye, but no further injuries. She was a shell of herself after the incident, having lost her husband, lover, and daughter within 24 hours. Though she cooperated during the divorce proceedings, she made no effort to contest custody or collect the financial settlement I offered. A year later, Richard returned the unused funds to me. Rebecca disappeared soon after, reportedly struggling with addiction and isolation. Despite supervised visits with Emma, she rarely showed up, and her contact with us ceased entirely. Emma and I moved to a new house within her school district, determined to rebuild. Counseling became a cornerstone of our recovery. Emma attending for years, while I sought therapy for 6 months before focusing on being the father she needed. 3 years later, I began dating again. Eventually, I met Joanna, a compassionate and understanding woman who embraced Emma and me. Our relationship progressed slowly, culminating in marriage 16 months later. Though we chose not to expand our family, Joanna became an integral part of our lives. Life stabilized, but milestones such as Emma's graduations resurfaced the pain of Rebecca's absence. Despite multiple attempts, Ethan found no trace of her. The prevailing belief was that she likely met a tragic end, alone and forgotten. Though the ordeal was harrowing, we persevered and found a way forward. With the right strategies, support, and sheer determination, Emma and I forged a new life. I remain grateful for the opportunity to heal and rebuild after everything was lost.